Go back to Africa. In the middle of a quiet afternoon in a small supermarket, a black man was shouted at directly in the face, right in front of dozens of people. But his response? Not a punch, not a duel, but a lesson that left the supermarket speechless. This is not just a story about racism. This is a lesson about self-respect, about buried history, and about dignity. This story, you must listen to it until the end. It was an ordinary afternoon. The parking lot in front of the supermarket was dotted with old oil stains. The sound of carts grinding against the tile floor mingled with the scattered conversations in the aisles. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the large glass doors, illuminating the colorful fruit stalls. Little did anyone know that in a few minutes, this ordinary corner would witness a confrontation that the whole neighborhood would talk about for a long time. Malcolm, a 34-year-old black man, pushed a metal basket toward the orange stall. He was not a celebrity. No one recognized him, just a technician who had just finished his shift, stopping by to buy some food and snacks for his 2 sons. Malcolm was dressed simply, an old gray hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers. He wore a watch he had bought at a flea market for less than $20. His left hand quickly scrolled through a few text messages from his wife, while his right hand held the shopping cart in midair. A very normal day, until, next to the orange stand, Margaret stood with her arms crossed over her chest. 76 years old, had lived in this area since the whole town was a vacant lot. She was the great-grandmother of the neighborhood. Everyone knew her by sight. Her silver hair was neatly cut short. She wore an ash-colored cardigan over a white shirt, and her wrinkled hands were fiddling with a bag of apples. She looked somewhat lovable, but her eyes today were not. From the moment Malcolm appeared, those eyes had been glued to him, scrutinizing every little movement as if he had just defiled the fruit stand where she had shopped for the past 40 years. The moment Malcolm stood right next to Margaret, his hand just touching the bag of oranges, she said a sentence, concise, cold but sharp as a knife. "People like you should know your place. Don't hang around here." Malcolm froze. His fingers, which were in the middle of typing a text message, also froze. A young mother picking potatoes nearby suddenly pulled her son back a step. But Margaret didn't stop. "Go back to Africa. You're not needed here." The words fell like a stone thrown into a quiet lake. The laughter, the clatter of carts, the scanning of barcodes suddenly stopped. The furtive glances. No one spoke, but the air became thick. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. He took a small breath, as if trying to confirm whether he'd heard it or imagined it. But Margaret's cold, challenging gaze left no room for doubt. She was dead serious. For a split second, Malcolm could have turned away, pretending he hadn't heard anything. That would have been the safest option. But no, today, he straightened up, setting his shopping cart on the floor. Malcolm straightened his back, his eyes locked on Margaret's wrinkled face. No anger, no fear, just a cold, incomprehensible calm. Around him, no one moved closer, but no one left either. They stood still as if the tiled floor beneath their feet had turned into a sticky trap. They didn't want to get involved, but they couldn't resist the pull of the moment. Malcolm spoke, not loudly but clearly like a bell in the middle of the stall. "Do you really understand what you're saying?" The question wasn't an accusation. It was like a mirror pointing straight at Margaret, forcing her to face her own words. But Margaret didn't falter. She lifted her chin, her eyes defiant. "I told you, this is my country, not yours." Malcolm nodded, slowly, each nod marking a stab of self-esteem. "Then let me tell you where I really come from." Malcolm's voice was low, but each word was like a nail hammered into the floor. "My great-grandfather was born right here in California. But before that, my ancestors were chained hand and foot, stuffed into dirty ship holds, and sold right here in America. They were forced to work themselves to death, building every road, every factory, every wall around this town, the place you call home." Margaret pursed her lips, but did not argue. The crowd around them had drawn closer now, each holding their breath. "My grandfather," Malcolm continued, his eyes distant as if they were looking through the supermarket, "was a veteran of the Korean War. He took up arms to defend this country. But when he came back, he was not allowed to sit at the same table with white people. Not allowed to enter the restaurant that serves people like you. He was not allowed to use the same water tap. No door to the door. And yet you stayed, because you believed that America would keep its promise, justice for all. The air in the supermarket was as thick as cold glue. The hum of the air conditioner faded. My parents, Malcolm continued, his voice softer but not losing its weight. They didn't carry guns, but they fought with their own lives. My mother was a teacher. She taught every child, black, white, and brown, about love, about equality. My father was the first person to organize a free community meal in this neighborhood, where anyone, regardless of color, could sit at the table. Malcolm paused, his eyes still fixed on Margaret like a judge waiting for a defendant to plead guilty. So when you say I don't belong here, you're wrong. My family paid in blood, in tears, in broken dreams for me to be standing right here, in the middle of this supermarket. I'm not a stranger. I'm the flesh and blood of this place. Margaret's hands gripped the handle of the basket of apples. Shaking uncontrollably, she opened her mouth as if to say something. But no words came out. The justifications stuck somewhere in her throat. Malcolm took a step back. Not aggressively, not forcefully, but his eyes never left her. I could have just walked away. But silence only breeds ignorance. If we want change, we have to face it. From the corner of the freezer, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap stepped forward. His voice was hoarse but sincere. He's right, we have to be better than this. Mrs. Garcia, who was of Mexican descent, nodded. My father was in the war. He said, only the color of the flag is worth fighting for, not the color of your skin. The cashier, Ava, in her early 20s, added, I've never seen anyone handle this so calmly and so strongly. Margaret squeezed the handle of her basket until her knuckles turned white. She didn't apologize, but the initial haughty look in her eyes had disappeared, replaced by the confusion and awkwardness of someone who had just come face to face with the truth. I didn't mean to, her voice trailed off, then faded into thin air. Malcolm just nodded. It doesn't matter if you meant to or not. What matters is what you just said. It hurts not just me, but the people who shed their blood to make this place theirs. From the deli counter, James, the longtime meat cutter, started a slow round of applause. At first it was disjointed, but then the whole supermarket erupted, not for Malcolm alone, but for his courage, for the way he faced hatred without getting angry. The atmosphere in the supermarket gradually relaxed, but no one could return to normal immediately. The greetings, the small conversations, all were covered with an unusual layer of silence. People continued to push their carts, continued to choose their items. But Malcolm's words echoed in everyone's minds. At the checkout counter, Malcolm lined up, his eyes meeting Ava, the young cashier who had just stood next to him. Ava smiled shyly but admiringly. Uncle Malcolm. Ava hesitated, but then gathered her courage to continue. I really appreciate what you just said. Not everyone dares to stand up, especially when they are still calm. Malcolm smiled, a gentle smile with a hint of fatigue. Sometimes, calmness is the most powerful weapon. Ava, anger only builds walls, but calmness, it opens up dialogue. Ava nodded slowly, as if she had just learned a lesson no textbook could teach. Malcolm walked out of the supermarket, the sunset stretching out in pale gold across the mottled concrete. His shadow was long, but his steps were steady, as if he had just shed some invisible burden. He stopped, a few meters away, in an old sedan. Margaret sat motionless behind the wheel. Her hands were clenched tightly around the wheel, her eyes staring blankly ahead. She didn't start the car, nor did she answer the phone when it rang. Malcolm considered for a few seconds. He could have walked over, knocked on the window, and said something more, but he chose not to. Some lessons took time to sink in. He knew he'd said enough for today. That night, in the small kitchen of his house, Malcolm told his close friends, the ones he'd grown up with in the dusty alleys of this neighborhood. Leroy, his friend from middle school, nodded slowly after hearing this. You did the right thing, Malcolm, not just for yourself, for all the black kids growing up. You didn't have to scream. You didn't have to smash things. But you told the truth. And you told it with dignity. Malcolm fell silent, his fingers tapping softly on the wooden table. Leroy's words struck a chord with the thoughts that were still swirling around in his head. Someone like Margaret, Leroy continued. They don't change after an argument. But you planted a seed. A plant doesn't grow after a rain. But if the soil is good enough, it will take root. Malcolm nodded. He knew, as uncomfortable as it was, as tiring as it was, this afternoon's confrontation was inevitable. Because silence only breeds prejudice. To change, you have to face it. Across town, in another small kitchen, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table. Her stew was cold, and she didn't bother to touch it. Her eyes were fixed on a distant horizon. But her mind was stuck in a loop of words. I'm not a guest. I'm the flesh and blood of this place. The words echoed in her head like church bells on Sunday mornings. She thought of her grandchildren, children growing up in a world filled with colors, accents, and cultures. She had never really thought about their future before. But tonight, for the first time, she asked herself, how will they live if I instill these prejudices in them? A small question, but it was enough to shatter the beliefs she had held on to all her life. News of the confrontation at the supermarket spread like wildfire. Word spread about the obscure black man, without a bodyguard, without a microphone or camera, but standing firm in the midst of a storm. The story was no longer Malcolm's or Margaret's story. It became a vivid lesson in dignity, in the power of truth, and in the courage to face hatred without letting it consume you. In the days that followed, something strange happened. Malcolm began to receive messages from strangers. Stories of hidden pain. Of times they were looked at with suspicion, spoken to with contempt. They told because they knew. Now there was someone willing to listen. From what seemed like a meaningless encounter, Malcolm opened up a larger conversation, one about respect, understanding, and justice for all. If this story resonates with you, do 3 things. Like the video to show YouTube that more stories of justice and kindness need to be shared. Subscribe to the channel to be part of the stories that change our perspectives and hearts. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell your own story, or just leave a thought after watching. Every like, every comment, it's more than a number. It's a voice. It's an affirmation. Justice is not a privilege. It's a right for all of us. Malcolm's story may have ended in the supermarket that afternoon. But this conversation, it's just begun.